Thanks for clicking on Wayne.com for the Week 5 edition
Midway point.
of Inside the Zone. Yeah, after this Friday, we'll be more than halfway through the regular season, which is crazy to think about. And I want to get right into this because this slate of games is, bar none, the most interesting slate of games that we've had all season long.
Yes, I agree.
Let's start off with the game that everybody was looking forward to, and it's hopefully going to live up to the hype. We're talking about Carroll, and we're talking about Snyder-Spooler Stadium, 7 o'clock this coming Friday night. We'll go a long way in determining who wins the first ever SAC Division A. I keep saying big school division. I just think it sounds nice. It sounds
it's kind
nicer.
of organized in that until you look at Northside Bishop Dwenger, which throws it completely off. So just when you think you understand, I would hope the SEC at some point comes up with better division names.
That's true. That's true.
Or that are A and B or big and small or whatever it is.
Well, we saw the Big Ten do that, and they're like, these names are terrible.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
They switched it around.
I mean, you can go the Marini division, the Kenny division. I think it's just
I like that.
I do too.
I like that. That could be something that could be done.
we'll
I mean,
start
the
pushing
influence of Inside the Zone is obviously palpable. So let's talk a little bit about that Carroll-Snyder matchup. What do you see as being some of the keys in this one? Because the hype around this game is going to be unreal for a regular season game.
You know, it sounds boring, but I think offensive and defensive lines. Because you look at, well, let's take Carroll last Friday. Played Bishop Dwenger. We know they're better than maybe what we thought they were the first couple weeks of the season, but they were able to run the football, and they were able to limit the run for Carroll. And yeah, Bishop Dwenger ran it a lot, and they averaged just over 3 yards a carry, but the volume that they did, the amount of yards they were able to churn out was impressive. And they made Carroll one-dimensional. And when I look at that game and go, okay, Snyder is exponentially better than Bishop Dwenger, offensive line and defensive line, then I start to wonder, can Carroll protect Jimmy Sullivan, which they have had trouble doing at points this season, and can they slow down Snyder's running attack? And those are the two biggest questions that I have.
Yeah, I was there for the bulk of the first half, and the one thing Dwenger was doing really well, they were playing very physical football with Carroll, and Carroll was like, oh, okay, like we're in for a dogfight.
Right.
And I think that's the way to approach them, especially on the offense, in the trenches on the offensive line, is to really play as physical as you can, because Carroll had some trouble with that.
Yeah, and I think that's where Snyder's MO is, and it sounds boring and cliche, but I'm telling you, like, Snyder throughout the first half of the season has played really, really good up front on both sides. And you look at Carroll and you're going, okay, they've shown signs, but I think the concern for most of the season has been Jimmy Sullivan's protection. And you could say this is the best defensive front he will ever go against, at least in the conference. And then conversely is, can they slow down Snyder? Because nobody's slowed down Snyder up front yet. Uriah Buchanan has been typically 150, 200 yards a game at this point. So can Carroll defend that? Because I think they got wore down a little bit against Bishop Dwenger. So that's kind of my big keys. I think there's athletes all over the field, right? It's cliche, but you say looking up front, you think, man, the way these teams have played, Snyder has the decided edge offensively and defensively up front.
And I think Carroll's receivers have done a nice job this year. Brady Road, I didn't really know the name at the beginning of the year. They're a big tight end. He's been a real safety valve for Jimmy Sullivan when pass protection breaks down or when his wide receivers are covered. That seems to be one of his go-to guys. Hanson Hafner had a huge game against Dwenger last week with 10 catches, 190 yards, and 3 touchdowns. But that game was really close until the fourth quarter. Carroll kind of put it on him there in the fourth quarter for putting up 40 points in that game. But it took them, a 6A school against a 4A school to the fourth quarter to eventually wear out the Saints and impose their will.
And a team that we looked at Bishop Dwenger going, man, how do they match up with Carroll? They were able to do it for 3 quarters. And is that a case of the Chargers looking ahead a little bit? I don't know. But we're so quick to judge teams based on the most recent performance, and you look at Carroll struggling and Snyder continuing to dominate. So it's just a vintage Panthers team in the sense that they're boring. You go there and you go in there with like, hopefully I get a couple big runs and a couple touchdowns, I can get out of here. So we start talking about the Tay-Tays and the Mylan Grahams and all the top athletes in the area, and we're not talking about Snyder very much. And it's not like they don't have those athletes, but it's really the dominance up front. And that's my biggest concern. When Carroll has gotten the better of Snyder, they've owned the line of scrimmage. But going into this game, I have questions if Carroll can do it against this Snyder team.
Yeah, you mentioned boring. You think about Snyder football, you think defense, you think monsters on the offensive line that leads to running game, and this is a very Snyder-esque team, and man, people in 5A better watch out when the postseason runs around. Let's talk a little bit about, you got Homestead at Dwenger, Northrop at Northside, Wayne at Southside, Concordia at Bishop Luers. So Bishop Luers pulled off the victory against Wayne at Wayne last week, 24-21. What do you take away from that? And then Homestead, you know, they continue to impress. We've seen them improve. That second week setback notwithstanding, they impressed against Carmel, I thought, and they've been progressing week through week. And it seems like they're going to be playing some really good football by the time the season is ending because they've got sophomores doing it for the first time, and now they're getting their feet wet.
Yeah, that Noblesville trip week 2 seems more and more like an aberration.
Yeah.
Maybe they felt a little bit too good about how they played in week 1 against Carmel. But I think we talked so much in the first 2 weeks about we were going to be able to judge Fort Wayne versus Indianapolis in a lot of those matchups. But I think you're seeing with Homestead and Bishop Luers in particular is a lot of young kids that they threw in the deep end in weeks 1 and 2, and they were going to sink or swim, and enough of them decided to swim, and now you're seeing on the back end of that is Homestead is better than what we saw the first 2 weeks. Bishop Luers has been better than what we saw the first 2 weeks. So it has paid dividends for both of those teams to play who they did, not necessarily for us saying, oh, Bishop Luers matches up like this or Homestead matches up like this. It was those are going to get us ready for the conference season, and both of those teams have looked good since then because of it.
Talking about teams looking good in the Northeast State, you got Leo at East Noble. That's the premier game this week in that conference. DeKalb is at Columbia City. Huntington North is at Belmont. Norwell is at New Haven. I know we talk every year about how Columbia City's schedule is backloaded, so I still feel like we're wondering exactly what they've got at this point, especially relative to last year, because there are so many new faces. But they've played very well. But I want to talk about Leo at East Noble because this is a game, for Leo, this is an elimination game based on last week with a game that completely lived up to its billing, 42-41 in overtime, a loss from Leo to New Haven. But man, a great night for football at Lions Field, and now you have to go up to Kendallville. This is a make or break when you talk about the Northeast 8 as far as conference championships go.
Yeah, it is. Man, that game could have easily went the other way when it got into overtime and the missed PAT and stuff like that. So when you look at Leo and how do they bounce back, well, they have no time to really kind of feel woe is me. They have to go and get ready for Kendallville, going to Kendallville to play East Noble. The big thing I think in this game is this is kind of East Noble's first big test too in conference as well. So how well does East Noble match up? The real only game that really gave them trouble was that Snyder game. And I think we maybe undervalued on how good that East Noble looked in that game relative to how good Snyder is. So this is kind of it's a put up or shut up game for Leo, and it's a let's find out how good East Noble type game is too. So ramifications on both sides coming up in week 5.
How much fun is the Northeast 8 this year, though?
Oh, it's a blast, man. It's a blast.
I know that we talk about the SAC a lot, and rightly so, being all here in Fort Wayne, but like I'm really enjoying what the NE8 has provided like week in and week out. It's always been cool to watch.
Yeah. Every week we seem to have at least one game with either means a lot or at least you're intrigued by.
Yeah.
I mean, even Columbia City DeKalb, you're like, well, I mean, this is going to be the best team that Columbia City has played this year, and it just gets exponentially worse or tougher throughout the rest of the year. So you're like, maybe we find out a little bit more about Columbia City. I mean, you get into the SAC, and I think the bottom is as low as it's been in quite some time. So you look through that, and you're like, man, some of those games just are complete mismatches. But you get into the NE8, and you're like, okay, you got Belmont down there at the bottom, but everybody else is competent or better.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. And the ACAC has also been intriguing so far this season because we're here in week 5, and you got 4 teams that are undefeated. Now, they haven't obviously played each other,
right?
And we're waiting to see how that triumvirate of Heritage and Adams Central and Bluffton, how that all shakes out. So we got a lot of interesting football coming up, and maybe South Adams gets back into the mix.
Yeah.
Who knows? But when you take a look at this week's games, Heritage at South Adams, Bluffton at Jay County, Woodland at Southern Wells, and you got South Adams down at Monroe Central. I mean, Heritage at Adams Central.
Yeah,
I mean, it's all. I wish we could have spread some of these games out over the last few weeks because this is game of the week material when you take a look at these two.
Is this the biggest game for Heritage since the Wasilics were playing at Heritage, it feels like?
Wow.
I mean, I seriously, like, this is so much hype for Heritage coming into this one because of what we've seen so far this year, that defense in particular, being able to play as well as it did, shut out Woodland. Then it limits South Adams as well. So this is a defensive unit that I think is leading the way. Kobe Meyer has been tremendous, close to 20 touchdowns through 4 weeks. But, man, it starts defensively for Heritage. and biggest game in a long, long time for the Patriots.
Yeah, Tagulis had a couple of touchdown catches last week, and you take a look at the Litchfield kid, who's a big receiver that can do some things. They're going to give Adam Central trouble, and like we've seen with Adam Central, sometimes this year it's taken them a while to get things started. Now, they eventually seem to impose their will on people, but you can't get down to Heritage early would be my, I guess, would be my takeaway heading into this game.
There have been very few weeks where we're scrolling Twitter or whatever we're calling it now, and you go, 37-0 Adams Central midway through the second. Okay, that's fine. Like it's always, we're not seeing those blowouts, and maybe that's the expectations we've set for Adams Central, that they should just be destroying everybody. They're not doing that, but that doesn't say that they can't. So I think maybe this Friday either we learn that Heritage could be a definite factor in the ACAC, or Friday night we're going, oh yeah, okay, Adams Central's above everybody else in this league. I think it's going to be very telling.
All right, and let's talk about the NECC as well. Garrett is at Eastside in the Train Trophy game. West Noble is at Fairfield, Lakeland at Angola, Busco, Prairie Heights, Central Noble, Fremont. We've talked about West Noble a little bit on the show, but man, they just look like an absolute juggernaut in the NECC's big division. Fairfield comes in with a 3-1 record, but you know, Monty Mayhorter is in season 25. This ain't his first rodeo, man.
He knows what he's doing,
He knows what he's doing, and he knows that he's got some guys. Drew Yates at quarterback, Seth Pruitt. You got the other Yates catching touchdowns. You got Mikhail Bottle. Like, you got a lot of guys for an NECC big division team.
And a lot of dudes that aren't seniors, too, at West Noble.
Yes, a lot of juniors.
More concerning if you're the NECC. Last week at this time, I'm looking West Noble, Lakeland, give me that matchup for the NECC, and then Garrett ruins the party and plays tremendous and holds them to 9 points on Friday. So when you look at Fairfield, comeback win for them on the road against Culver, scored the final 16 points of that game to win, including an overtime. So they're coming off a big road win, and now they're the next team to try to slow down West Noble. But man, that offensive attack has been absolutely tremendous.
And I think the one thing that might work in Fairfield's favor, although I would think West Noble goes in as a favorite, is that they played Heritage in week 2. So they've seen with Kobe Meyer and that offense, they've seen what an effective offense looks like on Friday night. So they actually have a little bit of a barometer, and maybe have Matt Thacker and those guys have tweaked some things heading into this game.
And it's never easy to prepare for that Fairfield attack, right, with that triple option. So that's always the great unknown, and see if West Noble can corral it. It's nobody's been able to keep up with that running game, and it sounds simple enough to stop it, but it's more difficult in practice.
They're like the Navy of the NECC.
Yes, it's just annoying little misdirections.
A 1 week, 1 week problem when you only have that much time to prepare for something that's very different.
Not easy.
Again, it is week 5. What are you most looking forward to about this week? Because we've kind of been talking about some of these games and had them circled on the calendar since week 1, when we thought we had an idea of what we were getting here.
Well, I mean, the SAC comes down to this one. I mean, let's be real. These are two of the best teams, not just in the area, but the entire state in their respective classes. This is it for the SAC. If we didn't have conference or divisions, it would still be the biggest game of the year. Both of these teams are at as advertised. It's coming down to this, and then we'll get a little bit of more clarity with the NE8 we did last week. We'll continue to get it this week, and then the ACAC. Let's just find out how good Adams Central and or Heritage are.
All right. That sounds like a whole heck of a lot for us to cover. On Friday night, we'll be here next Monday to break it all down for you. But for this week's edition of Inside the Zone, he's Justin, I'm Glenn. We'll see you next Monday.